Hey guys, welcome back. Happy Friday. All right, to start the weekend off, as promised, we will be doing a granny square tutorial today. This is what our finished product will look like, should look like. As you can see, this is made using size 4 acrylic yarn. You will need a crochet hook. I have a Susan Bates 5.5, an I or a 9 in the US, and a yarn needle to weave in those pesky ends that are left behind, and a scissor. An old scissor, as you can probably tell. Okay, so let's get going here. Now this tutorial does assume that you know how to make a double crochet. However, if you're pretty new to this hobby, I do in slow motion show you how to create the double crochet while doing the tutorial, but I will show everybody in a tutorial next week how to do a double crochet. That will be specifically a double crochet tutorial next week, so tune in for that. Okay, to start with, you will need to make a slip knot. Now I make my slip knots a little bit different than most people, so I'm just going to show you how I make mine. If you make them different, then you go right ahead and do it your way. If you're just doing what I do, then just follow along. So I make mine to start with look like that. And I just kind of insert my hook, and then I pull this yarn around my hook. Now I do this because I like to hold on to the bottom piece, as you will see. My big thumb is going to be covering it for a little bit here while I'm doing my chains. And then it will probably be covering the circle that we create too, but we will get going here. So to start with, we're going to chain 4. Oop. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now before I go any further, I want to apologize ahead of time for the lighting in here and the surface. I'm working on my desk. It's black. It's like an old countertop made into a desk. But the lighting is not the white light that I have throughout the rest of my house, where I can actually, it's very bright and you can see easily. We're in the office and my husband wanted a yellow light in here, so we have that in here and I'm working with that. So I apologize, and I also apologize with the quality if the video is a little bit blurry. I have just a webcam that I'm filming with, and it's not super high tech. It's obviously I'm new to this whole thing, so I will be eventually upgrading, but right now I'm working with what I got, so bear with me. But you will still be able to see what we're doing. Okay, so we have our chain 4. Now, what we are going to do to create a circle is we're going to slip stitch into the first chain, right here. Alright, so I'm going to take my hook, insert it into the chain, yarn over, and pull through both loops on my hook. I have created a circle, as you see, and then we will start with our double crochets. Now, as you saw on this chain, or on this granny square that I have made, we are going to create shells. So, and we're going to, this is where we're at. We have our circle. Now we're going to create these 4 shells, which is a cluster of 3 granny squares. All right, so that's what we're going to be working on in the first row. So in order to create our first shell, we will need to chain 3. 1, 2, 3. All right, so a shell, as I mentioned, consists of 3 double crochets. Now this chain 3 that we just did will count as our first double crochet. So we need to do 2 more. So in order to do a double crochet, you will need to yarn over, insert your hook into the circle, yarn over again, pull up a loop. So we have 3 loops on our hook. Then you will yarn over again, pull through 2 loops. You will now have 2 loops on your hook, yarn over again, and pull through the last 2. So that is 2 double crochets. We're going to do 1 more to create the shell, yarn over, insert your hook into the circle, yarn over. Now you should have 3 on your hook, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Now we have created a shell. So now we need to do a corner. The first row is basically going to consist of 4 corners and 4 shells, or 4 clusters. No, shells. A shell is 3 double crochets. Anyway, as I was saying, 4 corners and 4 shells. So we got our first shell. Now we need to create the first corner. So I'm going to tip my work. So my first shell is on the right side. I'm going to chain 2. Okay, and then I am going to work 3 double crochets or another shell into the circle. Okay, 2 more. Alright, so now I have created my first corner. Now, this consists of 3 double crochets or a shell, a chain 2 space, and another shell or 3 double crochets. So we need to do that 2 more times, or technically 3 more times, in order to finish our first row. So again, I'm going to turn my work. So my last worked shell is on my right hand side. I am going to chain 2 to create that space, and then I'm going to work a shell or 3 double crochets into the circle again. Oops, I'm hung up here. Oh, no. As you can see, that does happen when you're pulling through yarn. Sometimes if your yarn is kind of, it splits a little bit, you'll get a little hooked. So just pull it out and do it again. Alright, so I am doing 3 double crochets into this circle. Well, and as you can see, my yarn split again, so I'm just gonna slide that through, and then pull through the last 2. Now I've created the second corner, and we have 3 shells when we need 4 shells. So I'm going to make 1 more shell and 2 more corners. So again, I'm going to turn my work. So my last worked shell is on the right hand side, and I'm going to create a space, a corner space. So I'm going to chain 2 again, and then work the last shell. Oh, got a little dog hair in there. You'll probably see that quite a bit. With my dogs, there's hair and everything. So we just did our chain 2, and we will work our last shell into the circle. One more. Okay, so we have our last shell in the circle, but we are not done yet. I will turn my work again, so the last worked shell is on my right, and then I need to create the next corner, or the last corner. So in order to do that, I need to chain 2. Okay, so now we need to finish this row. How are we going to do that? Well, remember our first worked chain of 3 right here? All right, see this top chain right here? We are going to slip stitch into that to finish the row. All right, so now you should have 4 corners and 4 shells, and it should look like that. All right, so to get to row 2, what we're going to do is we are going to start our shell in this chain 2 corner space. But how do we get to that chain 2 corner space if we're over here? We are going to slip stitch across the top of these 2 double crochets. So that's what I'm going to do. And slip stitch into this chain 2 space. All right, so now I'm in the chain 2 corner space here, and I'm going to create a shell, or also I'm going to create a corner. Do you remember what the corners were from our last row? Our corners include a shell, chain 2, shell. So I'm going to make that in the first corner here of row 2. So I'm going to chain 3, get my shell started, and add 2 more double crochets to finish my shell. Okay, we got our first shell. Now we're going to turn the work. So the shell just worked is on the right hand side. Chain 2, like in our last row, and do another shell in the chain 2 space that we just worked in. All right, so we have created the first corner on our second row. Now, if you choose to do so, you can add a chain right now, and that will make your spaces in between your corners larger. I don't like larger spaces on my granny squares, so I'm not going to add a chain. I am simply going to make another corner or shell, chain 2, shell in the next chain 2 space that we created. Okay? So that's what I'm going to do. All right, I have created the first shell of the corner, and now I will chain 2 and make the second shell of the corner, because remember it needs shell, chain 2, shell. So second shell. One more double crochet. Okay, so now we have 2 corners and a chain two or a space in between our corners. So now we need to create another space in between this corner and what will be this corner. Again, if you want bigger spaces, you would chain one right now. If you do not, just create a shell into the next chain two space. I apologize, I'm not used to holding my yarn like this in the knife grip. This is the knife grip when I'm holding it right now. I'm used to using the pencil grip or the pen grip. I'm doing this so I can show you up close what I'm doing, and if I was using the other grip you would not be able to see what I'm doing, so it's kind of a weird, it kind of looks weird the way I'm crocheting right now, but that's why. So I'm still working on the first shell in the next corner. Alright, so I got the first shell of the corner, but to finish it I need to chain two, and then add another shell into the same space. Alright, so now we have created our third corner of row 2. As you can see, we have one more corner to go and 2 more spaces to make. So I'm going to turn my work, and if you're adding a chain for a larger space, you would do that now. If not, just create another corner or shell, chain 2 shell into the next chain 2 space, just as I'm going to do. Just unraveling my ball here so it doesn't pull on the square. Alright, finish the first shell. One more double crochet to make here on this shell. Alright, chain 2 and last shell. Sorry, my granny square is rolling up on me here. Alright, so now we have all of our corners done and almost all of our spaces created in between our corners. You should, so this is what your granny square should look like right now. So in order to finish this row, like in the last row, we are going to slip stitch into the top of the first chain from this row. And that, before you slip stitched, if you had bigger chains or bigger spaces, you would add a chain to make a bigger space before slip stitching into the top of chain 3. Alright, so here is, I'm just going to pull that up so you can see our second row is now done. We have shell, chain 2, chain 2 shell, space, shell, chain 2 shell, space, shell, chain 2 shell, space, right here, shell, chain 2 shell, space. Alright, now we are going to start row 3. just like row 2, put my hook back on here, we are going to slip stitch across these two double crochets here into this chain 2 space. And into the chain 2 space. Now, just like in row 2, we are going to start with a shell. So chain 3 to start, and add 2 more double crochets to make a shell. And to make the corner, what are we going to do? Add chain 2. And what do we do after the chain 2 in our corners? We are going to add another shell. Alright, so let me yarn in a knot here. So we have created the first corner of chain 3. Now you will notice that we have a space, a chain 2, or not a chain 2 space, just a regular space, because I did not chain 1 in between. If you did chain 1, it would be referred to as a chain 1 space, but I did not, so mine's just a space. What we're going to do is work a shell in that space. And because I am not chaining 1 in between to make my spaces bigger, I am not going to do so now. If you did, then you would do so now. So I'm going to work a shell into this space. Alright, so now your granny square should look something like this. Corner and shell. Now I'm going to turn my work because we need to do another corner right here. And again, if you're making bigger spaces, add a chain here. If not, just do a corner, which is a shell, chain 2 shell in this next space. Oh. Granny Square's trying to curl up on me here. Alright, now I'm going to chain 2 and do the shell. Alright, so your granny square should now look something like this. Corner, shell, corner. I'm going to turn my work, and we're just going to repeat that. So it's going to be a shell in the space in between the next corner. So we're going to do a shell right here. Sorry, move my work down so you can see it. All right, got our next shell. Now I'm going to move over to the next corner and work a shell, chain 2, shell in the next corner. Chain 2. Oop. And shell. Okay, so your granny square should look something like this. 3 corners and 1 shell in between each corner. So now I'm going to turn my work so I can see what I got left. And it looks like I have 1 shell and a corner left. All right, no, that's incorrect. I got 1 shell, corner, 1 shell left. So let's work another shell. Got my shell. Now I'm going to work the last corner into the 3rd row here, which is shell, chain 2 shell. Okay, so I got the beginning of that corner done. So I got chain 2 and work the last shell in that corner. Okay, so here's what your granny square should look like now. You should have 4 corners. This one looks a little funky because I haven't finished the square yet. You should have 4 corners and an open space left. So what are we going to do to finish off this row? We are going to put a shell in this next space. Alright, so I got my last shell into the granny square. Gotta undo my yarn here so I can work with it. This ball does not want to cooperate with me at all, so work with me here. Alright, so we should look like that. Lift it up a little bit so you can see. Now, in order to finish our square, we are going to slip stitch into the top of this chain 3 here, just like in the last row. And there we go. We have finished row 3. We are going to do one more row so you can see, and if you want to continue after that, you certainly can do that. You just keep doing the same thing that you're doing. So in order to get over to this chain 2 space that we want to start working in, we are going to slip stitch into the next 2 double crochets. And into the chain 2 space here. Now, in order to make the corner, we are going to do shell, chain 2 shell. But we are going to start with a chain 3 and then 2 double crochets to make our shell, just as we have been doing. Unravel my yarn a little bit more. Chain 2, shell. All right, so we have our first corner of row 4. What are we doing in between, do you remember? We are going to we have 2 spaces now and not just 1, because as each row increases, so do the spaces in between the corners. We will still always have 4 corners, obviously it's a square, but the spaces in between the corners will multiply by 1. So we will work a shell into each of the spaces, that's what we're going to do. Okay, that's our first one done. Now we will work a shell or 3 more double crochets into the next one. All right, so now we got our corner and 2 spaces filled with shells. Now I'm going to turn my work so I can see where I'm going from here, and it looks like I'm going to be creating another corner. So I'm going to add a shell, chain 2 shell, or 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochets. Okay, chain 2, 3 double crochets. Trying to do this as slow as I can so you guys can see what I'm doing. It's a little bit more difficult as the square gets bigger here for me to crochet in this grip, but I think it's working okay. So now we have 2 corners done and 2 shells in between the corners. We're going to do the same thing. I'm going to turn my work. As you can see, I have 2 spaces, one right here, one right here. I'm going to work a shell in each of those spaces. So 3 double crochets. First shell done. 3 double crochets into the next space. So that's what your granny square should look like right now. I'm going to do my third corner with 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochets. Chain 2, three double crochets. Alright, so your granny square should now look something like this. Just gonna move my camera back a little bit. Alright, so we have one more corner left and 4 more spaces. So I'm going to do 3 double crochets in this space, 3 double crochets in this space, or shell in both spaces. Mark my last space here on this side. Alright, so I am at my last corner. So we are going to work shell, chain 2, shell, also known as 3 double crochet, chain 2, 3 double crochet, however you want to say it. To some people, shells can confuse them, so I say it both ways. Get my yarn unraveled here. Oh, if you could see this blob of yarn flopping around on my desk over here, you would probably laugh. Next time I'm going to use a hand-rolled ball of yarn. It's going to be easier. Okay, chain 2 and shell or 3 double crochet. Oop. As you could tell, I did not do that one right. Because I only had 2, when I pulled up a loop, I only had 2 loops on my hook instead of 3, so. But we fixed that. Alright, so I got my last corner here. Now, to finish it off, I need to do 2 more shells or 2 more clusters of 3 double crochet. So I'm going to do that now. Got the first one done. Now I'm going to do the last shell. Alright, so as in every other row, we are going to slip stitch into the top of the chain 3 here to finish our square. And then, because I don't like how it just looks sitting like this, I will always slip stitch into the next one to make it look neater when I'm finishing it. Okay. Square's kind of big here. Can't exactly move my camera back any further, so we'll move it forward here. Okay. So, I'm going to snip my yarn. I'm going to give myself a little bit of a tail here. Then I am going to tie it off. So I'm going to finish that, tie a little knot. Now again, if you know how to do this differently, you go right ahead. This is just how I finish a granny square. Then I am going to weave in this tail. So I'm going to flip over my granny square and find a little spot to weave it in at with my needle here. I like to use the backs of the shell to do so. Okay. Now, I usually, if I'm going to make this for myself or a craft show, what I will do is I'll tie a knot right here at the very end before I snip it. But I'm not going to do that today. But just so it doesn't come back unwoven, I like to do that. So you can certainly tie a knot right here before you trim it. Here, I'll just do it really quick, actually, just so you can see what I mean. So, there, I got myself a little knot right there, just so it doesn't come through. And then I'm going to snip it. Now the only thing I have left is this tail, the chain from which we started. Now normally I like to weave it in right here, so within the back of the shell. And then I will pull it tight so as to cinch the circles. Oops, sorry, bumped my camera. And like I said, I'm working in a tight space here. This, for some reason, is a little bit frayed. I'm just going to snip that. So now I have this. I'm going to tie it. Normally I would cinch that shut. I did not do so like I normally do, but before I tie it I will pull it tight. But since this is not the best yarn to work with, it's just a scrap, it's kind of thin and I didn't want to pull that too tight because it would snap. So, but I have a tight circle and a knot so it doesn't come back through. Snip the tail, and that's it. We have a 4-row granny square here. Lay it flat here. I like to, like I said, I like to pull my corners out so you can see that. There it is, people. That is our granny square tutorial for the day. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comments below. As always, if you haven't done, like and subscribe so you can get more crochet content from me. I will be doing a crochet video where I'm just crocheting and chatting with you guys next week. And I will also be doing a double crochet tutorial next week. So we will be learning the double crochet in case you guys couldn't do this with us because you didn't know how to double crochet and I was doing it too fast for you to follow. So next week we will just do a tutorial in double crochet. But with that, I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. Practice up on your granny squares. Do it till you feel comfortable. If your granny square doesn't look right, like my granny squares always look a little bit different, as you can see. This one's a little funky right here because I pulled the my tail too tight. So it has a little bit of a bump right here, and I don't like that. But you can block it, so you would just, block it to make it stretch out, and that would fix that problem. As you can see, it kind of already did. But every granny square does not look exactly the same, but the more you practice, the more consistent it will get, and the faster you will be able to make them. At first, if you're just beginning, your crochet tension might be a little bit tight, which is normal, but the longer you crochet, the looser or the more relaxed your hands will get, so that will loosen up some. Okay, if you guys have any other ideas for tutorials, again, please leave them in the comments, or if you have just like a topic you want to talk about for next time, my next video next week, go ahead and leave that in the comments below. Otherwise, you have a great weekend. I will see you guys next week. Bye.